Hello from Crow Scratches with my newest making up video. This time I'm starting with a quick view of the project in Illustrator, including the rough work where I was figuring things out. Once my vectors are in order, I just press print, then the laser uses those as a guide for its cutting and engraving paths on the wood. While the laser definitely makes my life easier, this project also requires a lot of old school woodworking. Every single one of those square pegs needs to be chiseled down to a proper dovetail. And as you can see here, I have just given up on not showing my lap in these videos. For me, working in my lap like this is just genuinely the most comfortable and natural way for me to do it, and I immediately decided that I wasn't going to try to bother clamping all the pieces and finagling things in a way so that you wouldn't be staring at my thighs while I carved out my dovetails here. This part of the process requires a lot of back and forth, shaving teeny tiny slivers off the dovetails just to try to make sure that that joint is as tight as possible and not wobbly. A large amount of the work in this project goes towards the top and getting that nice rounded curve on it. Obviously the laser is only going to cut everything at a 90-degree angle. Going back to my Illustrator file, I did all the math there and worked out what angles I wanted everything at so that I could get the curve that I wanted. What I wound up going with was using a 15-degree router bit. That way everything is perfectly in line. I've got my granddad's old router table, and I promise my fingers are not as close to the bit as they appear on the video. But yeah, this is one thing where I am so glad that I do the process I do, because this way I only have to do the math the one time. All my slats are at the perfect width in the Illustrator file, and I don't have to worry about miscutting anything and wasting wood every time I make a new chest. Now that the top's kind of curved, time to make it very round. Obligatory camera bump. I do promise I try not to do that. I just fail. I'm going to be using a hand planer in a second, but using the planer on the end grain there on the edge just chews up the wood. So first step is to get a very low grit sandpaper. I'm using 60 grit, and rounding off the very edge before I start going at it with the hand planer to get the majority of it rounded off. Once again, working in my lap is the easiest way for me to do it and get the angle, possibly because my planer isn't the best thing in the world. And unfortunately, I didn't notice that that cord was in the way, so we're gonna get to watch that at the bottom of the screen for a long time. I'm using the planer to remove the majority of the material and get everything properly round. It's only after I have it shaped that I then go back in with the sander to make sure that everything's nice and smooth. You can see that I'm holding it by the clamp there. That's because nothing is glued yet. The top still has to go through the laser and get engraved. Because of the amount of material I take off during this whole process, I can't engrave these pieces when I engrave everything else. All this work would just completely destroy the engraving if I tried that. But this dovetail construction makes it very easy to clamp it like this, and that way once I take it all apart, engrave the slats, and then put it together, everything still fits the exact same way it did before. A deliberate part of the design is that each of the dovetails is just slightly longer than it needs to be. They are not flat flush on the sides, and I'm just going through with the sander really quick to round them all off and make them look a little bit more rustic rather than machine made. Now all the prep work's been done and everything can finally be glued together. The dovetail construction helps a lot. I wouldn't trust the dovetails entirely to keep together. I don't have them quite perfectly joined. You can see it's not all so tight that I'm having to force the dovetails into their slots and use a mallet to tap the wood into place, hence the using of the glue. The biggest help with the dovetails is that it makes everything fit together perfectly. Nothing's going to slide too much. It doesn't require the massive amount of clamping it would if I weren't using dovetails in this whole thing. Applying the last little bit of glue, and the last end piece just slides right on. Everything's together. Applying a couple clamps just to put the pieces as close flush together as they can be. And all that's left is to clean up the extra glue that squeezes out. Just have to make sure that I get all the little inner corners on the inside of the box cleaned up. going in with a wet Q-tip. Quick hit with the sander again, just making sure that everything's nice and flush. Also making sure that any glue that's pulled down in a crevice gets covered with sawdust. As I said before, my dovetails aren't absolutely perfect. You can see some small gaps there. So, I saved up some of the sawdust, and I'm going to make my own wood filler. Everything's going to match absolutely perfect because this is the sawdust that came off this wood. All I've got to do is mix it up with some glue, get it to the consistency I like, and just smush it in there. And once the filler's had a chance to dry a little bit, once more over with the sander, and everything is nice and smooth. Slats have now gone back through the laser, very carefully lined up so that the engraving matches. And you saw me checking, it doesn't really show up on the video, but to make sure that I have everything arranged correctly, I do have numbers and little letters penciled in onto the wood itself. I've had it on the slats, had them all numbered so that they're in the right order, have it on the edge pieces so that I know which side's front ways and I don't mess it up. And now it's just time to glue all the slats and stick them into the sides. The only way to really do this is to fit all the slats into one of the side pieces, and once they're all together, try to slide the other side piece over on top. It can be very difficult, especially if everything is extremely tight. This actually went really easy this time. Only took a little bit of shifting the slats around to get them all in their homes. And just one clamp in the center there to press everything together tight. The sanding really is endless in this project, but just a real quick hit. That way sawdust sticks to any glue that might be in a crevice. And we're done! Using a freebie toothbrush from the dentist to just clear all the sawdust out of the engraving. Honestly the best method I've found, and doing that just because I don't want the sawdust to mix in with the paint that I'm about to use. I'm using the same golden acrylic paint that I use for most projects. It's just a good quality paint. For this one though, I'm watering it down a lot. I don't want the paint sitting on top of the wood, I want it soaked down in it. Part of it is that I want the wood grain to show through the paint. I'm not looking for perfect vibrant paint on top of this wood. Watering it down to this degree makes it look and act more like a stain. We're going to be watching me paint this for a while, so now seems to be a good time to talk about the engraving. The lion and the unicorn in combat is a very old motif. You see it in a lot of poetry, children's rhymes, and especially in tapestries. Medieval tapestry is mostly where I'm drawing the imagery from for this. I'm also mixing in some maiden and the unicorn imagery that was also very popular in tapestry. Fun fact from medieval bestiaries, unicorns were symbols of purity and grace. They had a lot of Jesus connotations that got mixed up with them. But at the same time, unicorns would mess you up. The unicorn's horn was not decoration. It was pretty well established that you would get impaled if you messed with them. The sort of meaning and theme behind the maiden and unicorn motif was that you had this fearsome, swift, intelligent creature, and the only way that you could capture and kill it was to abuse and sully purity and grace. Back to the lion and unicorn in conflict, The go-to explanation of the motif is that the unicorn represented Scotland while the lion represented England, because each of them were the heraldic beasts of each country, and of course England and Scotland fought a lot. This lasted until James II got to be the king of both countries and smushed the heraldry together. At the same time though, as far as I can tell, the imagery is older than the conflicts, so it's entirely possible that the lion and the unicorn could just be a symbol for two generic powerful forces in conflict. It's a little unclear. And I managed to talk right over the oiling process. I just finish off all my wood with linseed oil. It works as a good protection on the wood, keeps it from the humidity messing things up, which is a massive issue in Mississippi. And after drying for a night, the project's finally ready for the hardware. These are some pretty light-duty clasps and hinges. The box as a whole is very light, so you don't need anything very heavy-duty. And also because the wood's only 1/4 of an inch thick, anything with massive bolts is just going to be way too much. It's a little hard to tell in the video. The best way I found to do this is to use double-sided tape on the hardware and place it where I want it. Then using a very small bit on the drill, I can drill out the holes through the hardware instead of having to trust my measurement. And once the holes are drilled, I just have to peel up the hinges or the clasp, peel the tape off, and put it back in place, and the holes will guide the screws so that everything is placed exactly where I want it. I've got the clamp there holding the top and the bottom together perfectly the way I want it in the final product. That way the top isn't sliding around and getting misaligned with the bottom as I'm doing this whole process. I do have the clasp set upside down from the way it would normally be positioned. The thing is, because the curve on the top starts so soon, you saw me try to put it the right way up at first, and the metal top of that larger half of the clasp was sticking up, and there was no good way to make it flush against the wood. So the easiest solution to the problem was just to rotate the entire thing. Clasp works just as well in this position as it does before. Most people just get caught for half a second when they have to flip it down instead of up. Just gotta put in the last couple screws and this project is done. A nice medieval style chest, put whatever tokens and collectibles you like in it.